Welcome back. 741. Being the child of a Holocaust survivor can be difficult. Who could possibly understand the horrific experience? But one woman from the northern suburbs learned a lesson in forgiveness that could be helpful for anyone living with fear, anger, or resentment. He was born Avrum Yankel Steinsapier. He was 20 when the Nazis invaded Poland. One night, 2 Ukrainian men came to his house and executed his family. He watched, hiding in the barn.
My father witnessed them being butchered to death. And since that time, my father just ran into the woods, into the forests of Eastern Europe for 3 years, and he never looked back. He killed Germans and Poles whenever he could to ensure that he would survive.
He escaped the Nazis and survived the Holocaust when so many of his loved ones did not. He found a passport with the name Kaplan and assumed the young man's identity, Ari Kaplan. He emigrated to America with very little except a legacy of bitterness. He started a family, but they were hardly living the American dream.
At night, he would have dreams and nightmares and wake up screaming and crying. It was very difficult. So even when he was sleeping, the Holocaust was still so much a part of him, and he could never let it go.
Instead of enjoying freedom and loving his family, he was bitter and abusive. As a little girl, Karen did her best to avoid him, but his behavior had a damaging effect on everyone for decades.
I'm the one that's remaining the victim. I'm the one that's living in this internal hell. And I realized that I need to let this all go because it's madness hanging on to all this negative, emotions. So here's a picture of my family.
The solution seems simple: forgiveness. On her father's deathbed, she told him she forgave him, but it wasn't enough. She thought if only he could have forgiven the Nazis, their family would have lived a happier life. So she traveled to the scene of the massacre that had haunted him.
And this is Marcella. This is gravestone. One more gravestone.
I stood there crying like a child again, bawling. I had forgiven all those that had murdered my family and the perpetrators of the Holocaust. My family carries this lineage of suffering, and I didn't want to carry that burden anymore.
That should have been the end of the story. Men broke into Karen's home and terrorized her family.
I jumped out of my bed and I was screaming, "Who are you? Who are you?" And one of the men tied my hands up, threw me on the ground, and held a gun at my head. I finally realized what my father felt during those years in the forest. And even though my experience is just an inkling of what he endured, I was paranoid, I was anxious. So can you imagine living in a house, being afraid to even walk out onto your deck? I was fearful, I was scared.
When her daughter dialed 911, the men escaped. They were never caught.
I knew that I needed to forgive those men. And I realized that even though I want justice and even though I want those guys caught, justice is not going to bring me peace. Forgiveness is going to bring me peace.
Karen says she's met other children of survivors who do not publicly want to admit that their parents were abusive. She says her faith taught her that she couldn't forgive someone who didn't ask for it, but she learned that she needed to forgive unconditionally. Her book is called The Descendants of Rogrud: Learning to Forgive.